What if the person sworn to uphold the law was willing to break it in the most unforgivable way imaginable? What if a man trusted with power, authority, and public safety decided that murder was the easiest way to win an election? Tonight's story isn't about a criminal hiding in the shadows. It's about a sheriff who believed the law didn't apply to him, and when he realized he was about to lose everything, his badge, his power, his freedom, he made a decision that would cost an innocent man his life. This is Crime Line. And this is the true story of a corrupt sheriff who ordered an assassination. In the mid-1990s, in DeKalb County, Georgia, there was a man who truly believed he was untouchable. His name was Sidney. At 57 years old, Sidney had spent most of his adult life in law enforcement. He wasn't just a cop. He was a homicide detective, a position that came with power, respect, and influence. But it also came with something else. A reputation. Sidney wasn't known for being careful. He wasn't known for restraint, and he certainly wasn't known for accountability. Over the years, he had been involved in 2 on-duty deaths cases, where suspects ended up dead during police encounters. Under different circumstances, those incidents might have ended careers, but not for Sidney. He walked away from both incidents without punishment, no charges, no suspension, no consequences. And that's when something dangerous began to grow inside him. A belief that the rules were optional, a belief that power meant immunity. In 1996, Sidney decided he wanted more control, more authority, more power. So he ran for county sheriff. The election was intense, but Sidney won, and with that victory, he made history, becoming the first black sheriff in the county. Publicly, he was celebrated. Privately, the corruption began almost immediately. As sheriff, Sidney now oversaw one of the largest county jails in the United States. More than 700 employees reported up the chain of command to him, and he treated them like personal servants. Deputies were ordered to pick up his children from school. County vehicles were used for family trips. Officers were forced to escort him and his family on vacations like chauffeurs in uniform. He even used the department's in-house legal team for his personal legal problems. But the abuse didn't stop with employees. Inside the county jail, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Inmates were denied proper medical care. Basic necessities were neglected. Oversight vanished. Sidney began assigning inmates to perform manual labor at private homes, work that had nothing to do with rehabilitation and everything to do with exploitation. Lawsuits began piling up. Inmates accused the sheriff's department of negligence, abuse, and unsafe living conditions. Some cases reached federal courts. And yet, Sidney remained untouched. But behind closed doors, his corruption went even deeper. Bribes, extortion, sexual coercion. Women who worked under him later claimed they were pressured into sexual relationships, careers held hostage by his authority. Sidney didn't hide his behavior. He didn't need to, because he believed he would never be held accountable. By the year 2000, Sidney's term was nearing its end. And despite the lawsuits, the rumors, and the complaints, he decided to run for re-election. That's when Derwin entered the picture. Derwin was a veteran law enforcement officer with a solid reputation. Well-liked, respected, trusted. From the outside, he watched Sidney's administration closely. And he didn't like what he saw. Derwin believed the sheriff's department had become rotten from the top down, and he wasn't afraid to say it. So he ran for sheriff. His campaign was direct, unapologetic, and dangerous to Sidney. Derwin promised reform. He promised investigations, and most importantly, he promised accountability. When election day arrived, few expected Sidney to lose, but the votes told a different story. Derwin won. Just like that, Sidney's world began to collapse. In a matter of months, he would be out of office, and once Derwin took control, investigations would begin immediately. Sidney wasn't just facing unemployment. He was facing prison, and that was something he could not accept. As the reality set in, Sidney began to panic. He didn't want to step down. He didn't want to be investigated, and he certainly didn't want to lose his power. That's when the idea formed, a dark, irreversible idea. What if Derwin didn't live long enough to take office? If the sheriff-elect died before being sworn in, another election would be triggered. And Sidney believed he could win that one. All he needed was for Derwin to disappear. Sidney reached out to a deputy named Patrick. Patrick had a reputation of his own, shady, reckless, and deeply loyal to Sidney. One day, Sidney invited Patrick to his home. Inside, Sidney handed him a piece of paper. Written instructions, a murder plan. Patrick read the note and felt his stomach drop. This wasn't some rough intimidation tactic. This was an assassination, and Patrick knew something else. If anything went wrong, Sidney would walk free, and Patrick would take the fall. Patrick told Sidney he couldn't do it alone. Sidney agreed to bring in help. Patrick contacted 3 former Sheriff's Department employeesmen who were familiar with weapons, surveillance, and intimidation. Sidney promised them rewards, promotions, power, positions in the department once he reclaimed office, and unbelievably, they agreed. The men began stalking Derwin. They tracked his movements, monitored his home, observed his routines, but none of them were professional hitmen. They hesitated. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. 3 months passed. Derwin was now 3 days away from being sworn in as sheriff. Sidney was running out of time, panicked and desperate. Sidney called Patrick. Tonight, it had to happen tonight. If Derwin took office, Sidney's fate would be sealed. That evening, Patrick and the 3 others drove to Derwin's home. They waited in the darkness. And then Derwin arrived. As Derwin stepped out of his vehicle, the men emerged. Gunfire erupted. 12 shots. Derwin collapsed in his driveway. He never stood a chance. The men fled. And just like that, a sheriff-elect was dead. Investigators immediately looked at Sidney. The motive was obvious, but evidence was scarce. No recordings, no paper trail, no witnesses willing to talk. The case stalled, and slowly, it went cold. Sidney believed he had gotten away with murder, but crime has a way of resurfacing. In 2001, Patrick was involved in a drug deal at his own home. Edwin badly shots were fired. 1 man thief. Police arrested everyone involved including Patrick, now facing murder charges himself. Patrick panicked. He had a choice: life in prison or tell the truth. Patrick made a deal with prosecutors. Immunity in exchange for everything he knew. He told them about the note, the plan, the promise. The sheriff, another conspirator, was arrested. He confessed to. This time, investigators had what they needed. Sidney was arrested. At trial, the truth came out. The corruption, the manipulation, the assassination plot. The jury didn't hesitate. Sidney was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. Patrick and 1 other conspirator walked free under immunity deals. The remaining 2 were also sentenced to life. Sidney believed power made him untouchable, but in the end, it became the very thing that destroyed him. This wasn't just a crime. It was a warning that no badge is above the law, no office grants immunity, that no amount of power can silence the truth forever. This is Crimeline, and this is why justice matters.